You're listening to Sports Connections with David Smale, the show that brings you a fun and intimate look into connections throughout sports. Now here's your host, David Smale.
Kevin Harlan is the busiest man in sports broadcasting. He announces college basketball games for CBS television and Westwood One Radio. He also does the same for NFL football, doing multiple games every NFL weekend. He even did the end of two games at the same time for CBS at the end of the 2019 season. Mixed in with that schedule, he's also one of the lead broadcasters for TNT's NBA package. The voice of America, his trademark, may be his ability to make even the obscure part of a broadcast, including a cat or a drunk fan running on the field during a football game, just part of it. Just Google his name and you'll see highlights of his legendary calls. He's well respected and well liked through the industry, and you'll soon find out why. He's gracious, humble, and funny. He's a great guy to have around, and he's always been willing to help me when I've asked for a few minutes of his time. Kevin, welcome to Sports Connections.
Hey, David, great to see you. Great to be on. Thank you for the invitation. Always enjoy our conversations.
All righty. Well, I know the story, but not everybody knows how you developed a love for sports. So why don't you tell that story?
Well, my dad was in sports with the St. Louis Baseball Cardinals as a PR director in the late 60s, and then went to Green Bay when Dan Devine left the University of Missouri. Dan did, the St. Louis Baseball Cardinals, asked for someone young in their front office he could take to Green Bay to run his Packer front office. And my dad's name was the one that they recommended. My dad took the job. We moved up there in about 1971. I was 10. And so that's really kind of where I say that I grew up in Green Bay. Mm-hmm. And with the dad in the business, it certainly gave me, David, a lot of opportunities to look, quote unquote, behind the curtain, see sure. how press boxes ran and how teams operated. I was a ball boy during football practice. I worked on sidelines, spotted during games up in the press box. So that really kind of lit the fuse for me and got me interested in sports.
Now, a lot of kids growing up kind of run away from dad's business. They don't want to be in the same business, but when that business is sports, it's a little easier to follow in the footsteps, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And my dad was always very welcoming. My dad was a journalism major in college, and he, I think, knew how the business was evolving, knew that I loved sports. I also wanted to be an airline pilot, but he took a look at my math grades when I was in grade school and said, maybe you should think about something else. And I did with his guidance. And he certainly was the main force when I was looking into the business, when I was in end of grade school, beginning of high school, or high school at a radio station. But I remember when I was about 7, 8, 9 years old, hearing the voice of John Facenda narrate NFL films, mm-hmm. and heard broadcasters like Ray Scott and Pat Summerall, and that really, it was almost more the voice and the delivery than the action itself, which really kind of piqued my interest. And so as I was just a young kid, I'd listen on the radio at night for games and really grew to love the business of broadcasting and knew at a very early age that's what I wanted to do. But my dad was certainly so instrumental in me early on, learning some of the principles of reporting, being a good reporter, how to write. And, that really was the catapult for me.
Now, we'll get a little bit more into your broadcasting career here in a second, but did you play sports growing up?
Yeah, I did. I played hockey. I played football. I played baseball, played both football and hockey through high school, and then began to really, at the same time, and studying, of course, really worked a lot of broadcasting events. I did the basketball teams games. I broke my collarbone halfway through high school. And so my junior and senior year broadcast football games. And so I took advantage of the student run 10-watt radio station, but certainly
10
played, 10 watts. It got about 5-mile circumference from our all boys Catholic high school, but enough that my parents could catch it. A lot of the parents of the kids at our school, when we were doing games, could listen. And it was really, but it was on the air. I mean, it was a legitimate FM radio station. And that, again, continued to be a very important link as I was building a career.
Do you have any of those old recordings? And if so, do you ever listen to them?
I'm afraid to listen to them. I think back home in Green Bay, if I looked hard enough, I probably could unearth some cassettes, and only it would be my mom or dad holding the microphone to the radio.
Yeah.
So that we could listen. But I remember after my first broadcast, I was being driven home because I didn't have my driver's license yet. I was 15 and I was being driven home. And when we pulled up in our driveway, my dad was sitting on our front porch with a bunch of notes in his hand that he had taken during my broadcast.
Yeah.
But, that was so important at that age. I could equate it to perhaps a young athlete who at an early age knew he or she wanted to be in tennis or golf or wanted to play football or hockey or whatever, and starting so much before everybody else.
Yeah.
And at that time, like 1976, 77, 76, probably 75, I was, 14, 15 years old. Like there were no kids broadcasting games.
Right.
I was broadcasting games in my room, but not on the air. And so this was over the air, and you had to be professional and prepare. And he taught me all these different things that he saw the broadcasters do. And then what was great is on Sunday, I would go to the press box for Packer home games, and I would spot for the visiting radio networks coming in to broadcast Packer games, like the Lions or the Bears or the Rams or whoever. So I got to not only work the games, spotting who made the tackle for the broadcaster, but got to hear how they did it. And one of the most indelible moments was when I was about 15 years old. The Packers were playing a preseason game in Milwaukee, which was nationally broadcast by NBC. And the broadcasters were Jim Simpson and John Brody.
Oh, wow.
And my job that Saturday night in August, my sophomore, junior year in high school, was to get on a headset and listen to the other baseball ballparks around the country as they would feed in baseball scores, because NBC was televising the baseball game of the week and felt that they had to be this kind of all-purpose.
Yeah.
There was no cable in 1974, 75.
Right.
And I'd write down scores from the Phillies and the Pirates, hand them to Jim Simpson, but at the same time listening to him do the game, the preseason game for the Packers, watching him and John Brody work for NBC. And that really threw kerosene on the fire for me to watch what he did. And his voice to me was, and to this day, I can hear it in my mind how he sounded. He was an incredible broadcaster with this incredible voice.
Yeah, I remember actually meeting him at a sports information directors convention in '81, right after I got out of school. And he had such a presence about him, yes. But he was gentle. He had a gentle voice. And you don't think of broadcasters and the word gentle, but his was just so lilting. I really enjoyed Jim Simpson.
He had lilt he had a lilt about his voice.
Yeah.
But it was like if you closed your eyes and heard him talk, he sounded like a network announcer. And I thought about that a lot. My dad would always talk about like when Summerall and Madden would do Packer games for CBS before they left to Fox. My dad would always talk about Pat Summerall, walking down the halls of the front office of the Packers as he was meeting with the coaches, and just the elegance with which he carried himself. Yeah. And of course, he had this great voice, like Ray Scott.
Yeah,
he had this great voice. Simpson had a network voice, a commanding voice, but it had a lilt to it, which was an elegance to it, which was really.
Yeah.
But I think of all those guys, Scott and Summerall and Simpson, in my mind, there was another broadcaster too, Chuck Thompson, who broadcast a lot of NBC baseball games, but was the voice of the Baltimore Orioles. And I've listened to his voice often on YouTube, his commencement, but his induction speech into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown in 1993. And listening to that voice, to me, that was the voice that I wanted. That was, he epitomized what I hear. I don't sound anything like him,
right.
To my chagrin, but that is who I wanted to be. I wanted a voice like that.
So, and I was going to ask you if you tried to pattern yourself after anybody, so it would be him more than anybody else.
Chuck Thompson, Summerall, But those were like TV network NFL guys.
Yeah.
So like I would listen to Jim Durham in Chicago do the Bulls on radio.
Right.
Joe Tate in Cleveland on 3WE. I would listen to Jack Buck do Monday Night Football, and before him, Lindsey Nelson, and in between was Don Criqui that would do it. Lindsey Nelson did it for Mutual, Criqui did it for NBC, and Buck did it for CBS. And I always think about that every time I sit down to do a Monday night radio broadcast on Westwood One, which is the umbrella for CBS, ABC, and NBC radio. They run all those networks,
right?
And the umbrella is called Westwood One. And so I think about these great voices that have been in my chair, and I feel like I'm keeping it warm for the next person down the road. But I think about the enormity of that job, doing the Super Bowl for Westwood One, doing Monday Night Football for Westwood One on radio, and think of the great broadcasters that preceded me. And I take great pride in that. I recognize that. I love voices. I love voice in particular and the development of it and how to make it stronger, better. If listening to but I have great reverence for the broadcasters before me, like the Scotts, the Summeralls, and the Jack Bucks.
You and I are roughly the same age. I think I've got you by about a year and a half or so. But our generation, we spent our summers like, okay, we're through with breakfast, go outside and play, we'll see you at dinner type thing. We all dreamed, if we had any interest in sports, in being an athlete. When did that switch get flipped for you when you stopped dreaming of being a professional athlete and started dreaming about being a professional broadcaster?
Oh, I'd say, I was broadcasting and playing at the same time, and they were hand in hand. But I'd go home, from the time I was about 11 or 12, and I would do games off a TV set in my bedroom. I'd close the door and practice doing games.
Yeah.
And then would listen at night as I was going to bed with my radio on. So I guess I kind of figured I wasn't good enough to play. I had a little bit of interest in hockey. I was a goaltender in hockey up in Wisconsin. And so that for just a slight moment, but I knew that broadcasting was going to be what I wanted to do. Broadcasting was my entree into staying involved with sports.
Right.
Like I said, I wanted to be an airline pilot so I could travel. That appealed to me. And then I saw, all these network announcers come through Lambeau Field's press box and saw kind of the aura of them when they walked in, and people knew, oh, there's Lindsey Nelson, or there's Ray Scott, or there's Jack Buck, or there's Pat Summerall. And I kind of liked that feel, that aura that they carried themselves with. So I would say 14, 15, I knew, I still enjoyed playing and played rec ball, basketball on weekends, but I knew broadcasting was going to be what I wanted to do. And my dad always said, the earlier you know something like broadcasting, that just gives you such a head start on everybody else who usually figures out what they want to do in college. But I knew early in high school, grade school, 8th grade, 7th grade, what I wanted to do. And at his suggestion and encouragement, began to do that.
And little did you know that with your career in broadcasting, you'd still spend half your time in airports.
Right. Yeah. It's not as glamorous as now as I once thought it would be. The best part really is when I'm not doing games and traveling with my wife. Right. But I will tell you, there are moments when a little bit of that would creep in. When I come home on a Sunday night during college basketball season, we just did Michigan State and Maryland for CBS, big national game, and then racing to the airport afterwards and getting on the plane and sitting in my seat and, kind of that exhale and knowing that, you've just had a game that was entertaining. It was a national broadcast. There was a time a couple weeks ago, we're lucky enough to spend some time in Florida in February, which we had always talked, my wife and I had talked about doing once we were empty nesters, and the kids will come down and visit. So we spent February in Florida, and I had just done the Michigan-Ohio State game with Bill Raftery from a studio in New York. I wasn't on site, but in this pandemic world, we're doing a lot of things from studios and away from arenas. But I just finished a real exciting game, and again, raced to the airport and sat in the seat. And I kind of thought, this is kind of what I dreamt, if I were ever lucky enough, blessed enough to do this job, I could enjoy that kind of part of the travel and couple it with having done an important game for CBS.
Yeah.
And, in CBS, those letters are pretty important in the history of broadcasting.
Sure.
And to do a game for CBS, a national game, and then go and get the chance to have dinner with my family in Florida that night, that was a pretty unique and wonderful moment, and kind of the small reward you get for working in the business and having to travel.
I want to talk to you about some of the elements of your career that really sets you apart. First of all, is you're the only guy I know who actually admits to rooting for Kansas and Missouri. You went to Kansas, you broadcast for Missouri. You actually did some broadcasting while you were in school for Kansas. And for those people who don't know, that's like rooting for Duke and North Carolina,
yes,
or Michigan and Ohio State, or Auburn and Alabama. How do you pull that off?
I had gone to Kansas. I did the Jayhawks with Tom Hedrick for a year, Larry Brown's first year, then went and did the Kansas City Kings for a couple of years. So there was some separation. When I was doing the Chiefs, the University of Missouri was looking for an affiliate in Kansas City with some teeth, and they went to KCMO Radio, and they said, and by the way, we would love to use, one of your announcers for our broadcasts, and specifically they mentioned me. And of course, I was thrilled, because I had always, again, as I was dreaming about what my career might look like, I was doing the Chiefs on radio. And I always thought, if I could ever do a Saturday afternoon college football game and the Chiefs on Sunday and do them on radio, which is my first love, I said, now that would be, I would be hitting a home run. And sure enough, that chance came up doing Missouri. But I had to drive down in mid-July and sell 4 people that, as a KU guy, I could do the Missouri Tigers, and do it with passion, and do it with feeling, and do it like it meant the world to me. Well, anybody that's heard me broadcast knows that every broadcast I do, whoever it is important. And I try to make it the biggest thing on my plate. So I drove down to Columbia on a hot July, like Tuesday afternoon. And the people I had to meet with were Jack Lingle, who is the AD at Missouri at the time, Joe Castiglione, who is now the AD at Oklahoma, but was the assistant AD at the time, Woody Woodenhofer, who is the football coach for the Tigers, and a guy named Norm Stewart, who is the basketball coach, who has a very open dislike for anything Jayhawk.
Anything in the state of Kansas.
And the state of Kansas, exactly.
Yeah.
So we went to Boone Tavern and had lunch, me and these 4 people. And Joe, right off the bat, was so welcoming. And just to fast forward a little bit, I eventually spended occasionally the night in Jack Lingle's home after a late connection Saturday to Sunday, and not wanting me to drive back to Kansas City that night after flying home with the Tigers and a football broadcast, stayed in his home. I was in Joe Castiglione's wedding a couple years later when he married Kristen. I got to know Woody Woodenhofer incredibly well before he was let go with the Tigers. And then Norm Stewart, on the first day of practice, that very first year, after I think he probably grudgingly gave his okay that I would do his games, I went to his first practice that first year, and he saw somebody, not really realizing it was me, up in the stands, had to ask someone who that was at this closed practice, watching my first practice for this new season. They said it was me, and which I didn't know. And he ran up the steps, sat with me for half the practice. He said, "What are you doing after practice?" I said, "I'm going to drive back home to Kansas City." "No, you're not. You're going to go out with Virginia and I. We're going to go out and get dinner, and then we'll drop Virginia off. Then you and I can go and hit a couple places around Columbia." and fast forward 3 years later, I wrote the foreword for his book. So I consider those years with the Missouri Tigers incredibly impactful. Loved my association. Loved those 4 gentlemen in particular. And Norm and I still exchange holiday cards to this day and consider him one of the real important people in my career. And I can't even imagine what my career would be like without Norm Stewart, without Joe Castiglione and Jack Lingle, some very important people in my past.
I'm a K-Stater. I love Norm. I just love Norm. He is so much fun. I remember him just absolutely unloading on Lon Kruger and then looking over at the scorer's table where I happened to be sitting and winking at me. I mean,
he was a showman. He was a showman.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, speaking of showman, I've got to ask you, the way I've worded it here is when a distraction happens in a game, some broadcasters will avoid it altogether, focusing on recapping what we've just seen or heard. You tend to blend it into your broadcast. And my favorite one just happened in the Super Bowl. Pull up your pants, take off the bra, and be a man. I've gotten more texts about that one than anything you've ever done. How do you shift in? Well, maybe you're not shifting. How do you stay in broadcast mode for those distractions?
Well, the only way I can describe it is I had a producer one time early in my career say, one of the keys of broadcasting is to immerse yourself in a broadcast, in a game. His words exactly were, lose yourself in the game. And I've always taken that to heart. I've tried to lose myself in the game, not get distracted, not, be torn away by maybe a mechanical or a technical problem. Lose yourself in the game, immerse yourself in the game. When you're doing radio, you are every bit that and then some. You have got to keep your focus. You cannot lose your focus. You need to immerse yourself in the game. And with the two people that ran out on the field, both literally ran right through a formation. So I'm calling the play and I'm setting up the offense, and quarterback is looking at the defense and he said, wait a minute, somebody's run out onto the field, and they've run right through, so it's like I've not missed a beat in calling the play, because this is what has happened. Some guy has run out on the field, and both times they've run right through the slot receiver's position. So it just was natural that I would call it as I saw it, and then, have a little fun with it. Both were on radio.
Right.
And had it been on TV, David, quite frankly, they wouldn't have shown it. I wouldn't have talked about it, except to say there's some guys running the field and they're going to escort him off after being arrested. But on radio, I think it's so much theater of the mind and your imagination and having fun and word usage and adjectives and setting the scene that I guess we're not showing him. No one knows his name. They just know it's some guy. There's nothing he's gaining by me, saying anything that he's on the field. So, probably in retrospect, I wouldn't have done it. And I swore after it happened on a Monday night game out in California, back in a couple of years ago, that I wouldn't do it again. This one just happened in the Chiefs and Tampa Bay recently played Super Bowl. But it wasn't just that a guy was running on the field like it looked like he had a costume on. Now, we were 11 stories up, and I'm relying on my naked eye to say, okay, a guy is on there. It looks like he's got a bra, and he had a tutu or whatever he had. I don't know what he had on, a unitard. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but I couldn't see.
Don't want to think about it either.
It looked like a bra. So anyway, that's where that came from. I was now listen. Had a rain shower started or a gust of wind or a hot dog wrapper blown across the field, I would have talked about those things and have at the same time. So it just happened to be a guy. I don't know, especially after this last one, if I'll do it anymore. I think I'm gonna probably put those to bed and move on. But I'm glad some people. I would never want to disparage the game. I would never want to disrespect the game. I think people know that about me, and they could clearly tell I was having fun with it. And if they took it in that way, I'm thrilled.
And before I get to some of your favorites, I want to ask if you remember, it was probably 1971, 72, some fan ran on the field in a Colts game, and I don't remember who they were playing, but linebacker Mike Curtis just leveled the guy. Do you remember that? And if so, are you surprised that a player doesn't just take out one of these clowns?
I am, because I guess it won't happen until one of them begins to give one of the players a tough time. Now, listen, I mean, there's a security issue here, and we don't know if they're crazy enough to run on the field. They're crazy enough to do about anything.
Yeah.
And I guess I need to think about that, as we all do as broadcasters, a little bit more strongly, because they could be carrying a weapon. I mean, we don't know. But I do remember Curtis doing that. Mike Curtis was a linebacker for the Baltimore Colts.
Yep.
I have looking at these guys. In my two cases, they've kind of run and gone away from the players, so you could tell there was nothing nefarious going to happen. At the same time, the fact that he ran on the field at the Super Bowl and the security is controlled by the league, I'm sure that's a very big concern to them. And there were guys at every aisle around the stadium. I will guarantee you next year security will be beefed up, and it would not be pretty. So but I do remember that. Yeah. And I think if a guy gave a player a tough time, I guess a player, because the guy is violating rules, I guess he doesn't want to be sued, but I'm sure they would like to wallop a guy coming out there.
Yeah. I need to find out if Mike Curtis is still alive and see if I can get him on a podcast, because that would be a fun one to do. I want to ask you real quickly about a few of your famous calls. So tell me your recollections of those calls. The first one is probably your most famous NBA call. LeBron James dunks on somebody and you say, "Without regard for human life." What do you remember about that one?
Well, the line actually is from a James Bond movie, Dr. No, when James Bond is having dinner at the underwater lair of Dr. No. And the villain, as always is the case, goes into great detail of how he's going to blow up the world or conquer mankind.
Right.
And Bond's response is, "You obviously have no regard for human life."
Okay.
So fast forward to our son, who at the time was about 2 or 3 years old and had a Nerf football set up in his room. And he would pretend like he was going to dunk over me as I was defending. And he would do that and slam it down. And we would say all kinds of crazy things like, "Oh, you take that out of here," or "You have no regard for human life," as he would, jam over me. And in that particular game, which was a playoff game from like 2007, LeBron James was just coming onto the NBA scene and was a dramatically good player and had this dunk over Kevin Garnett, the reigning defensive player of the year in the NBA. And I was working with Doug Collins, the best basketball mind I've ever worked with. And we were sitting next to each other, and he took his arm when James was going up and did what he did on Garnett with this extended dunk, and pushed me and at the same time him back in our chairs, and we were falling backward as I'm making the call. And I thought, if this means as much to Doug as it does in his son of his voice, I got to say something. So what do I say? I go back to when I'm trying to defend my 2-year-old, 3-year-old son in his room with the Nerf basketball, and use one of those lines, which just popped out. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
It goes, "Oh, with no regard for and I just used it like that. And I was thinking that was a line I used when I was trying to block Robert's Nerf basketball shots in his room when he was a little guy. And again, didn't give it a lot of thought, but social media did clearly, and they liked it, and that's where that came from.
All right, we'll skip over the goofball in the hat and the red shirt because you kind of talked about that one. The next one is the cat on the field, and what strikes me about that one is as he's running all over, he's not doing a straight line to the end zone. You say he's now in the CDW red zone. You somehow work the sponsor into your call of a cat zigzagging around the field.
Well, the Giants were driving on the Cowboys at Giant Stadium, at MetLife Stadium, and the Giants had just completed a pass to their tight end, and they were getting ready to get into the red zone. They were probably like at the 24 of Dallas.
Okay.
So the producer, who also is my boss at Westwood One, Howard Deneroff, had handed me the card to read. Once they got in the red zone, I was supposed to read this card. The Giants getting in the red zone. So the cat is running down the field. They had stopped play, by the way, and now everybody on the field, officials and players, are watching this cat run the other way because it was at the 50 and then began to run the opposite direction. And he got inside the 20. And my producer nudged me and kind of nodded at the card. And I said, and he's in the CDW red zone. CDW, people who get it. And so that's how that happened. So it was a collaborative move, but the company liked it. And again, social media liked that one too. You know, you don't think about, some people will say, well, do you think about doing it? What it might happen? Believe me, it is the last thing on my mind. I'm just trying to have some fun. And I'm working with Kurt Warner, and he laughs through all these things. And he and I try to crack each other up anyway. So it really is an extension of that relationship that this stuff even gets, you sees the light of day.
Do you have a favorite? I mean, I imagine they're all your favorite, but do you have a singular favorite of unusual calls?
I really don't. I don't think much about the ones you've brought up. The LeBron one was fun because it was in the, I got to kind of tie in kind of a memory with my son and I love James Bond. So that was kind of fun to eventually throw that in there. My favorite calls are the ones that I listen back to, David, and I felt like I've nailed, like on radio, I've captured all the elements of a play that I think it should have, and I've called it the right way. And it was a big play in the game. And I like that. More times than not, I don't. And so I'm frustrated with myself, but I'd like to think that the call that I'm most proud of is still ahead of me. I don't know what it will be, but I prepare for that moment that it is approaching, and want to make sure that I'm ready for it, and would like to think that moment is still ahead of me.
And speaking of not being able to prepare ahead of time, talk about calling two games simultaneously at the end of the 2019 season. And to me, the funniest part was Rich Gannon saying, "Which game are you calling?" "I'm calling both."
that is a memorable game, because the protocol at CBS is that we're supposed to throw it back to New York for James Brown to give an update, because they like the visual and they like the immediacy of it. But as our game was unfolding, the Chiefs had just scored a pretty important touchdown against the Chargers in the last week of the regular season. And of course, as people know, as the Chiefs won, they would get a bye, but they needed New England to lose. And at the same time of this Chiefs game, as they're trying to win at home, the Patriots are at home a heavy favorite against the Miami Dolphins. And it just so happens the confluence at the end of these games with important plays was literally happening seconds apart.
Yeah.
And not enough time to go to New York.
Right.
But with the immediacy and everybody looking on their phone and watching it, and you don't want to miss the moment. And so perfectly timed, the Chiefs running back, Damien Williams, has a sensational touchdown run. He takes it in. And at the same time, I look on the floor, and we've got a monitor down there of our net return, is what we call it. And I can see I've had them put in the New England-Miami game so that we can refer to it as our game is going on. And it just so happens that Miami has now got a goal to go with under a minute to play in New England.
Yeah.
And if Miami can score, they take a lead late in the game on the road where they're an underdog. And the Chiefs have just taken a lead in this game and cemented this win. And so this was happening, then that was happening, then this was happening, then that was happening. It really unfolded like you couldn't time it any better. It was just one happened, then the other happened. And so I called it off the TV as if I were doing radio. And the fans that were watching the game on their phones were watching it on our delay, because we have a 7-second delay. And so and then the beauty of it was our director began to notice that the fans were noticing that something was going on. So we called this, and the fans are going crazy, and now we show them going crazy, and the players are listening to, it just all worked out really well. It was really a nice moment. And of course, having done the Chiefs for 9 years, made it even more impactful.
Oh yeah. And I was watching at home, and I was like, I wonder if he's going to get in trouble for this, because he's not supposed to do 2 games, but it was so good. Even if they thought about getting you in trouble for it, they couldn't, because it was so good.
Well, I didn't know the game ended and no one had said a word, and our game ended. And I thought, I heard nothing from our truck. I could really be in trouble here. And Rich and I are packing up our things, and I take off my headset, and I said, Rich, this may be the last game I'm working with you, because I broke all protocol. And he goes, "Are you kidding me?" He goes, "That was like the highlight of our season."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm glad he thought, I mean, I love Rich. I love him like my dearest friend. I love him. And so he walked out of the booth. And actually, as we're coming out of the booth, a bunch of people that were in a suite a couple down had listened and watched and done all this, and they were waiting for us. And they wanted to take our picture after the game because they enjoyed that moment so much. And then we got in the elevator, went down to go to our cars by the truck, but we got to walk by the locker room, and all the Kansas City media members were there, and they were mentioning it to me as I was walking out. I thought, well, at the very least, people in the business got it.
Yeah.
And then as it turned out, CBS was cool with it, and it worked out okay. But, I try to stay away from those moments. And sometimes you kind of got to let your gut lead you, and knock on wood, but I probably need to be careful with it.
All right. I've got a very serious question for you. And just in a little bit of time we spent together, do you ever get tired? You seem to have boundless energy.
Well, I love my job. I love the business of broadcasting. I feel incredibly honored to do the NFL, the NCAA basketball games, and the NBA. So I never, it never is lost on me how lucky I am to be doing these games, and literally thousands of people would love to have my job. So I never without that thought in my mind.
Yeah.
And then I think of my employers, and I think of CBS, and we touched on it before, but CBS is this proud network, and kind of the gold standard in a lot of ways of what broadcasting is in this country, because they were the
Sure.
the forebearer to what we watch a lot on. They were the first network to ever broadcast the NFL and get a contract. And they were the first network to really put in prime time the NCAA tournament. They did a lot of Olympics, and some of the first Olympic broadcasts ever. They had their network of Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite. I mean, when I look down and I'm holding that microphone before I do games and see the letters CBS on there and see that iconic eye, their logo. I have to catch my breath sometimes because I feel so fortunate.
Yeah.
Then to be doing the NBA and working for Turner Broadcasting and what they've meant to the NBA. And so I guess, I've talked to you about Westwood One and how they are the umbrella for CBS, NBC, and ABC radio, and really bought out mutual broadcasting. I think about the great history of all these places I work. And so that energizes me. And I feel like, you're only kind of as good as your last broadcast. And I want people that, like, I'm guessing maybe there's someone who's never seen me broadcast a game. And I take great pride in my preparation for it. I put a lot of hours into it. I go back and watch my tapes and critique myself all the time. And it's like a torture chamber. I hate watching my own work, just despise it. But it's necessary because that's where I get my notes to improve on for the next broadcast. So when I kind of put all those things together and think about, by the grace of God, I'm in this seat with this headset or with this microphone, about ready to broadcast this national game. That can energize you pretty quick. So I try to remember those things along the week, and especially right before that red light comes on and that camera, what I've accomplished, who I represent, and how lucky I am to be in that position.
I know you're a very humble guy, and I want to read something that I read recently in the Kansas City Star. Kansas Star columnist Sam Mellinger has a weekly question and answer thing. And somebody said, now, of course, you were the voice of the Chiefs from 85 to 93. They said, they asked Sam who he would rather have call the iconic moment in Chiefs history, you or the current voice, Mitch Holthus, who's been there for like 25 years or so.
Oh, yes, a long time.
And his response was, I'm a Kevin Harlan fan, and I will apologize to no man for this. Kevin is a king, an absolute pro who checks all the boxes required for keeping broadcast moving, but also retains some of that childhood awe that makes sports fun. How does that make you feel?
Well, for coming from someone like him and read by you, it's humbling. And I've never met Sam in person, know his work well because I read him all the time. We've never really had a chance to cross paths except for occasionally and for just a moment or so. But to hear that from him is wonderful, and I respect him immensely for what he does, and to have him say that about my work is very humbling. So I appreciate that more than he or I'm glad I had not read that and not heard that, and I'm glad that you read that. That's nice to hear. That's
all right. Well, I'm actually going to talk to him later today, so I will let him know about that. You've been doing this for about 40 years. So I'm going to ask you, and you can answer quickly or however long you want, with all three of your main gigs, your dream matchup, and it doesn't have to be possible. So if we'll start with college basketball, you could say the 1985 Villanova team versus the 2010 Butler team, or whatever you want to do, or it could be an actual game that you called. So what's your dream college basketball matchup? Then we'll do NBA, and then we'll do NFL.
Well, I'm a little torn because I went to Kansas and broadcast Missouri, and some of those early 90s, late 80s games between Kansas and Missouri were classics. But really, I never thought of it that way going back. I guess, the Lombardi Packers would be fun to see how they would weather in this day and age of pro football. They were such a traditional, grinded out football team.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to do that. But really, David, to be quite honest, I've been lucky enough to do 5 Final Fours on CBS radio and 11 consecutive Super Bowls on Westwood CBS radio. And I feel like I did the Chiefs in the Super Bowl 2 straight years. I did the Packers my very first Super Bowl back in 2011. And that was, my team growing up, and have done the Jayhawks in the NCAA tournament, and have done the Jayhawks actually in a Final Four with Roy Williams. So I've really been able to live all of those types of things. I guess now I'm kind of at the stage of my career where I just love good matchups and good games. Yeah. All of them can be special, hoping for that great game. And I guess I'm now kind of into continuing to maintain my level of where I am and continue to just evolve and be better every broadcast. So maybe I'm not really answering your question, but I've done the Packers in the Super Bowl. I've done the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, my 2 teams. I've done the Jayhawks. I did the Tigers when I was broadcasting their games in the tournament. I have not done the Tigers for CBS in the tournament, which I'd love to do. And hopefully down the road I can. I guess that would be the last of my elements of my bucket list, is to do that. I've actually done my son-in-law when he played in the Elite Eight.
Right.
Sam Decker, who played for the Wisconsin Badgers. He played on 2 Final Four teams. He married our youngest daughter through Wisconsin ties. We go to Wisconsin in the summer. He's a Wisconsin boy. We kind of consider ourselves in some way Wisconsin people, and they met that way. And I guess I kind of feel like that is kind of a bucket list thing. I got to call one of the most important games for him, and then later in his NBA career, but his Elite Eight game that sent him to the Final Four, and he played well. He had 27 points and hit a big shot. So I really think I've been able to check a lot of, but I really don't think of it in terms like that. Only after it's happened. Oh, isn't it great? I got to do a Packers game. Isn't it great? I got to do 2 Chiefs games in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I've done the Jayhawks in a Final Four. I guess if I had one bucket list, it'd be to do Missouri maybe in a Final Four game where Norm Stewart was at, and maybe enjoy the broadcast.
Yeah. And I think that was a great answer. By the way, you didn't dodge it at all. You answered it very well. I had an opportunity to get to know Dick Enberg really well before he passed away. And I asked him one time, because he did everything. I mean, he did college and pro football, college and pro basketball, golf, tennis. And I said, "What's your favorite?" He said, "What season is it?" Yeah. And I'm guessing that would resonate with you.
It is. Every season I love. In this pandemic world, it's been a little bit odd because seasons have stopped and started, and they're not really in their natural season. But in the normal world, the way we once knew it, I loved the beginning of football because I love the NFL.
Yeah.
Then I love when the NBA starts, which is in the middle of football, and I'm doing both sports at the same time. And then I love after football, and I've done the playoffs and the Super Bowl. I love when my college basketball season starts. And for like 7-8 weeks, I am full force college basketball with CBS, and I love that. And all throughout that, the backdrop is the NBA. And when the Final Four is played and gone, here come the NBA playoffs. And then what I really enjoy is when I'm finished with the playoffs and I can be with my family for 3 months and not have to get ready for a broadcast and don't ever utter the words, I can't because I've got to get on a plane to do a game. I can say, I'd love to be there. What time do you want me there? I'm available for everything that my family needs of me. So I enjoy the change of seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Our life, I've been married for 34 years. Those seasons have been in lockstep with my wife and I and our raising of our kids. So we've really, as a family, kind of loved the rhythms of the different seasons, both on and off.
And you mentioned your family. You mentioned Olivia being in the business now. Did you encourage any of your kids to get
No,
happen?
No. I told Olivia, I told all our girls 2 things. 1, do not get in this business. It is too hard, and it's never been harder now with social media. But I just knew how difficult it is. See, all my kids have ever known is me at a major league level, and that is so hard to attain in this business. Number 1, because there are so few spots available. But number 2, just the luck, just by sheer luck and by happenstance, you are in a position that I'm in right now. And I knew how difficult that was.
Yeah.
And number 2, when you are there, especially for a female, for a woman, you are judged differently than a man because they'll see my tie and shirt and jacket and not think 2 things of it. They'll see my daughter go on and give a sideline report, and they look at her earrings, they look at her hair, they look at her, her outfit, her clothes, and like they would never judge me that way, but that's how women are judged in some circles. And that's so unfair. It's patently unfair.
Yeah.
So I told him, please find something else. But she gave me, Olivia, our youngest, our baby girl, she gave me the Dad Heisman and said, I've been in too many of your booths. I've been in too many press boxes. I have followed you around too much to know how much satisfaction you get from your job. My dad always told me, he said, there's nothing like waking up every day and looking forward to your job.
Yeah.
I've extended that and said, there's nothing like waking up every day and looking forward to being with a family situation in whatever form it takes that you embrace and your job that you love. And if you can hit those 2 things, you have hit the ultimate home run in life. To love where your life is personally and to love the job that you do. And that, luckily for me, I've been blessed in both of those areas. And I think Olivia has felt the same way too. She loves her job, but she loves her husband. So it's worked out for her. It's probably another conversation for you, but she was a senior at the University of Georgia. And she told me at the beginning of her senior year, hey, Dad, I'm going to go into Fox Sports South in Atlanta, driving from Athens. And they want me to come in and visit about maybe a possible position. I thought, Olivia, that's great. You can work as an intern and chart plays in the studio, during Saturday afternoon and be an intern and doing that. So she goes in and we've talked about preparing for interviews, and this is kind of her first big interview.
Yeah.
And she calls me about 4 hours later, and I was getting concerned. I go, why haven't I heard from you? And goes, I'll get to you in a minute. And an hour would pass and go, you okay, sweetie? And she goes, I'm still here. I'll text you when I'm out. She finally gets out and she's driving back to Athens and she says, well, I got the job. And I said, I am so proud of you. How great. So what, you'll be an intern. You'll maybe write some copy. You'll cut some tape. You'll edit some pieces. He goes, nope, better than that. I said, well, what? He goes, I'm going to be their sideline person for the SEC this upcoming football season. I said, oh, that's great. You'll be a producer with the person who's the sideline person doing the game. She goes, no, no, no. I am the sideline person. Now, all throughout college, she has been doing this stuff for the University of Georgia, doing stand-ups, editing tape, calling me at 2 a.m, writing copy. Like, she has worked endlessly at this.
Yeah.
But she now has been given this sideline of Fox Sports South. They got the third SEC game every Saturday until it all went to ESPN. But at the time, this was their final year with the SEC, and they hired her to do the sideline, which led to her doing the sideline for the NBA Atlanta Hawks that November in a full-time job. And I said, do they know you're still in college? You're still in school. You've got like tests and exams and projects you've got to do to graduate. And she goes, yeah, they know it, but they still want me around. I said, well, you are living a charmed life, and don't ever let your head hit your pillow every night by saying a little prayer of thanks because of how lucky you've been. This does not happen. This does not happen in our business, and you've been lucky enough, blessed enough to have it happen to you.
Well, and what I was going to say to you, and you can pass this along to her. I don't know her at all, obviously, but she may have gotten that interview because her last name was Harlan, but she has earned everything she's gotten. I love it when I'm turning on a Saturday college football game and I see her on the sideline because I know she's going to do a good job.
Thank you. They had no idea the truth. And I asked her this question. I said, well, do they know I was in the business? You go, no, not until the very end. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, they hired me and they said, hey, Libby, before you go, tell us about your family. And she was talking to these 3 gentlemen that were interviewing her. And she said, well, my mom and dad, we live in Kansas City. I've got 2 older sisters and a younger brother. My dad is actually in the business. And they said, where does he work? Well, he works at CBS. And Turner go, they said, Kevin Harlan? And they said, yeah, that's my dad. He goes, oh, and they all just looked at each other like, how did we miss the sign? But to me, like that was like that was like the validation.
Yeah.
Because I never want her to rely on a last name, and she didn't at Georgia, and she earned all the things she earned at the University of Georgia, and I was more happy than I can possibly tell you that was how she got her first job. Then word got out, and of course, then when she went to ESPN, they knew, and everything, Big Ten Network, and they knew, but in that first job, they did not. And that to me was that to me was bigger than getting the job, actually.
Yeah, that's awesome.
When they didn't know.
All right, I always like to wrap up with this question. I really appreciate your time today, Kevin.
Sure, David.
And I will preface it with this. I hope you don't retire anytime soon. But when you do retire, what do you think your legacy will be?
Well, what I hope it'll be is, I think what I'm most proud of is that I've been at the same address for many, many years, every stop I've made. And the only reason why I've changed addresses is because I've moved on to something else. I did the Chiefs for 9 years, but got the job at Fox doing the NFL. I did the Minnesota Timberwolves for 9 years, but left there because I got the job at TNT. I've been at CBS for 24 years. I've been at Turner for 25 years doing the NBA, and just finished my 11th consecutive Super Bowl. I don't think people realize how hard it is to keep the same address for a long time. And the people that do, I think, probably take most pride in that they were able to maintain a position of network prominence at that level in a business that sees a lot of change and a lot of turnover. So I guess I would like to think that I have by grace of God, another 10 years left in me where I can keep up the level of broadcasting, make them want to keep me on, and that I've earned, this longevity at not one, but 3 different networks, which is to me kind of a badge. It's hard enough to get a job at one network,
right,
let alone have 3 separate gigs. And I'd like to even throw the 2K NBA video game in there too. They started doing when I was back in 2005 was the first year, and have been part of that building to the second most popular sports video game in the world in back of FIFA and ahead of Madden NFL. So not that I've got a small, all I do is just call the plays. It's all the other stuff, but I am part of the 200 people that put that together, and that has lasted longer than any other run. And I feel, very prideful of my ability to keep that up. Now, like I said, I feel like I'm still evolving even at my age, and feel I want to still feel that way even when I'm 70 and beyond. And hopefully I'm, by everything, that I'm able to make it that long.
Well, I will add one more sentence to your legacy. You had fun doing it.
Thank you. I have. I hope people, when they hear the games, know that I love the business. I love the games I'm at. I am such a fan. I love the business of broadcasting. I love the business of broadcasting. It still holds a very romantic part inside my heart. I'm guided more by my head because I know I've got to perform, but my heart tells me every time that I'm there doing a game, this is what I dreamt of when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old.
Yeah.
And I feel like I hope there are a lot of people out there that can do something with their career that they dreamt of when they were a little kid. We usually dream of being firemen or doctors or lawyers and maybe broadcasters. And so few get to live out that dream. And every time I'm on the air, I get to live out that dream. And I consider that a pretty fortunate thing in my very lucky life.
All right. Well, Kevin, always a pleasure to visit with you, to have an hour one-on-one just to talk sport, just two guys talking sports. This has been even better than I anticipated. And I really thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. I've admired your work for many years, as you know, and I've written and told you that. I've been a small part of what you do in your career, with little bits of praise for the things you've accomplished in this business. And it's always very empowering when someone like you wants to talk about the business, talk shop. And I'm honored, feel the privilege to be on with you. Thank you so much for asking.
Thanks for listening to Sports Connections with David Smale. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and rate the show from your favorite podcast platform. You can learn more about David Smale and his work by visiting davidsmalebooks.com. Don't forget to join us weekly for new episodes. Until next time.